This video is to give you a quick overview on installing a Timbersled mountain horse on your dirt bike. If you're mechanically inclined, you have some tools and a place to do it, you're best to do it yourself. This will save you a day's wages of paying an installer.
Big bore bike like a 500 or a 450 four-stroke is the ideal bike for the Timbersled, especially the long track. I've got a recluse clutch on this one. Works great for street riding or in the bush or as a snow bike. There's some definite advantages to having a recluse in the snow. It's got a gel seat on it, Q4 pipe, and it's been tuned for the pipe, and the emission's been taken off. Now I'm just going to remove the parts off the bike. They're going to all have to come off eventually. I'm going to speed this up so you're not bored here. Put the bike off first.
The reason why I said install it yourself is because it's a time-consuming process, and if you got nothing but money, I guess you could afford to pay somebody else to do it. And if you're going to be reinstalling your wheels to ride it in the summertime, you're best to know how to do it yourself and be able to transfer everything over. It's not really a big deal. The kit does come with instructions, and I'm just going over some of the finer details on the installation.
Now the kit comes with two ways to run the brake. You could either use your rear foot brake and tie it into the brake system on the skid, or it comes with a long hydraulic hose that you hook up basically from your front brake, which is preferred by most guys. So I'm just going to remove the complete rear swing arm with the brake on it.
Next, I'm going to remove the side plastic, which I will reinstall after installing the kit. Now I'm going to remove the foot pegs, and then I'll remove the brake assembly. There's no need to disconnect any hoses. You just undo the rear brake master cylinder and leave it with the swing arm, and as you remove the swing arm, you remove the master cylinder with it.
So now I'm going to remove the foot peg on the other side. I'm going to leave the kickstand on for now until I get my jack underneath.
And now you got to remove the plastic, which you're going to reinstall.
Now what you want to do is remove your chain sprocket cover. I've already loosened the back bolt off the back side. And here, now it comes, there's the back bolt. And you can take your axle bolt right off now, or your nut. It isn't going to fall apart on you until you pull that axle out. And the sprocket's going to have to come off. You've got to put a different sprocket, drive sprocket on. And to remove this, decides the chain just stays on in one piece and comes off with the rear swing arm. As you can see here, I'm pretty fortunate to have lots of tools, things to help me here work by myself. I'm using the hoist, and I'm putting a clamp on around through the bark busters so it can't fall off. And I have a transmission jack, floor jack, that I'm using to hoist the bike up. So the next thing is to actually pull the axle out and slip the rear swing arm assembly with everything off. I have to remove the top shock bolt.
When removing the shock bolt, just make sure you take the weight off the pipe.
There's a little insert that goes into your axle that helps hold the plastic on, so let's go get that out of there. I've already removed the nut. I'm going to take a brass drift and pop the axle out.
Once you got the axle pushed 2/3 of the way through, you can just grab onto the other side and pull it out, and then just pull your sprocket off, and off it comes. Take off the kickstand assembly. You're not going to need that until spring.
Now your kit's going to come with bushings for your frame. Mine calls for white on the left side. And and then it has 2 oranges for the right side, one goes on each side. And I've already installed these from last time, and they're they have a yellow and bushing on each side, and there's bushings down on this rod too.
Now it's just a matter of aligning everything.
Now the axle is a very precise fit, so you really don't want to rush this. You want to make sure it's lined up properly, otherwise you'll damage the threads at the end of the axle. So I've been working at trying to line this up here.
This end of the axle I'm tapping in has a locating notch that must be lined up with the frame. Now install the nut and it should become flush with the end of the axle and torque it to specification, which is 75 foot-pounds on my application. Now line up the shock bolt and tighten up by hand with blue Loctite and torque it to specification. Mine's about 60 foot-pounds. Now I'm going to let the bike down and I'm going to relocate it in a different part of the shop.
So now we're going to pull the front forks to have them re-valved and stronger springs put in. You can't ride the Timbersled with the stock springs and valving. Otherwise you'll end up doing nosedives and that won't be very much fun. So I'm going to speed up the process here.
Remove the axle lock nut, loosen the pinch bolt off, slip out your axle, and now you can undo the triple clamp bolts to drop out your shocks, and you got to pull off your caliper. Just let it hang until you pull the hose off up at the reservoir. Then remove your plastic tube guards so you can take them in and have your shocks re-valved.
On my particular conversion, because it's a street legal EXE, I removed the front plate with the headlight and signal lights. I got to relocate my ignition switch to the side of the steering, and I have an LED headlight. If you're going to do any night riding, strongly recommend you get an LED light. It actually consumes probably less power than the factory light, but it's a lot more intense. So now's a good time to disconnect your hydraulic line for your front brake. And here's the rear skid line that's got to connect. Okay, so I've got my shocks back from Rider's Edge from Ian, and he's re-valved them and installed stronger springs. I've got some socks on here, as you can see. That's just going to protect the seals from snow going into the, more like ice going into the seals. So you got to have the bike obviously just so it's just being supported and the ski is free to move. I've already dropped the axle in, and there's a spacer. My bike calls for a spacer on both sides. This is a spacer here, another spacer here. Put on the axle nut. We're just going to snug this up for now. I'll torque everything afterwards when we're done. I don't need this right tight because I need to move the spindle back and forth to align it. Now the kit comes with these that go onto the tubes. There's a notch in them. They're actually notched for the caliper, so you just basically slide them down in position. Actually, the time to slide them down in position is when the axle is loose. Slide the other one on the other side. This one will sit up a bit off the bottom. It's just because this one touches against the caliper on the other side. So now it's a matter of positioning this so you can drill the holes in the correct position so you have the correct stance on the snow. So now with the axle just snug, we've got to have about 3/16 of an inch. These brackets have to be 3/16 of an inch inside. So I'm just going to tap this back. There's approximately where it should be. I'll definitely take a measurement. There's another thing we need to check, so I'm just going to snug the axle up so it's tighter. Not going to go anywhere, and then I'm going to let some weight down on the ski so it's actually the bike's resting on the ski. Now it's time to drill the spindle. So I've check my offset at the back here. I've got 3/16. I put a clamp on here just to make sure this thing doesn't move. Once you tighten the axle up, these things are pretty solid against the spindle. Make sure your new bit, grab a new bit, a 21/64 bit. I put a piece of rubber on here just to stop it when it goes in and it goes through, that I don't hit my axle here, or not my axle, my shock. So here we go. Okay, we're through. Okay, so I got the one hole drilled. I'm just gonna put a bolt through here and snug it up to hold it so I can take my C-clamp off and do the other side. Okay, got that snug. Take the C-clamp off and drill the other side. Okay, we're good there. Now it's time for the other side. So do yourself a favor when you're doing this side. This clamp can move up and down because it's not sitting against the caliper mount. So I'm going to definitely use the C-clamp to hold it because I can move this up and down with my fingers even though the axle's tight. But just to confirm, it's exactly the same height. So I'm using a square here. Checking it on both sides before I drill it, and the clamp should hold it perfect. So I'm not going to show you drilling it. I just want to take that precaution because you can't do this twice. Okay, so I'm all done here. Make sure you blow off all the chips before you put your bolts in. Lined up perfectly. There is no torque spec on these. You just want to make sure your gaps are the same. Don't over tighten them, but tighten them tight enough that they're not going to move. Now I'm a stickler for torque specs, so I'm going to torque my axle. I'm going to torque my bolts, my axle retaining bolts, and then I'll recheck the bolts on the top of the super clamp, or the triple clamp, to make sure it's all good too. So when you're tightening up this axle, when you get close to threshold torque, it'll want to start turning. So all you gotta do, just snug up the bolt on the other side. You already know it's bottomed, so just snug them up a bit, and then you can come up to torque. There we go. So with the kit, a pre-filter comes with it to put over your air cleaner to keep the water out of your motor. Basically, I call it, it's like a frog skin. But then you have to deal with keeping the snow out of the airbox. So I have like a frog skin that I've basically used Velcro, and I've got it attached to the back because I take it off every year. The only unsightly part is the strip that's along here that you'll actually be able to see once all the covers are on. And it velcros down everywhere, just keeps the snow out of the airbox. It works really well. I've used it for a year and it worked perfect. The other option is to gut the airbox, take out the rubber boot, and install something like this. I haven't drilled the holes in here yet to let the air through, but I was going to put this on, but I preferred just to use this system because it works well. This year I've decided to add on these rad guards. Basically they give it good support when if you fall over, to stop the rad from crushing, plus sticks or anything, which is very easy when you go in through the trees. Have a stick go into your rad. Rads are over 400 bucks, and you really can't afford to lose a rad too many times.